guys, welcome back to Strong Successful Male. So for today, I'm going to go over this really good article titled, When Being Single Costs You Double. Being unmarried can be taxing, and I don't mean emotionally. And guys, this whole article is about the history of the Bachelor tax. How all throughout history, whenever governments or countries became desperate, seeing that their birth rates have been declining, they then would start taxing single people or unmarried people who didn't have children as a way to get them to breed. And I thought this would be a good one to cover, guys, because right now we're in a period where all over the world, different countries, they're all having the same problem. Less and less people are getting married, and that means obviously less children being born. And the reason that governments are literally shitting their pants over this is because they need constant babies coming in to become future taxpayers, as well as to help for the economy. And so many countries, and particularly ones in Europe, I began noticing this around 2015. I'm sure it was going on beforehand. These countries started giving all these crazy incentives to get their citizens to breed and to either have children or have more children. And this isn't just Europe. This is happening in the United States. I've read some articles on this channel about the birth rates declining each and every year and more in the United States, as well as different countries in Europe. It's happening in Asia. I mean, just pick a country and you can see it. And it's pretty interesting. And unless something has happened I don't know about, there hasn't been a bachelor tax yet. However, it is certainly possible because it's happened all throughout human history. And this article is going to go back as far as ancient Rome when they were trying this. All the way up into the 20th century. It happened in the former Soviet Union. It happened in Italy during when Mussolini was ruling the country. Different states here in the United States have pulled this thing in the past. So it is not impossible to believe that it could happen one day because more and more guys are choosing not to get married. The marriage rate is becoming less and less. People are waiting a lot longer to get married. So you just never know. So that'd be a good one to cover. And by the way, I did a video back in the summertime that was covering this topic, but it was a different article. And this one's a little different, a little more at length. And I thought it'd be a good one to cover, especially for you guys that like history. So it starts off. Is there a right age to get married or to begin a long-term relationship? Today, the answer might be something along the line of when you feel ready or when you're mentally and emotionally prepared for the commitment, or even there is no such thing as a right age. In the past, it would have been more likely, why aren't you married already? For most of history, being single has been frowned upon, and I don't mean the way your mother keeps asking you when you're finally going to settle down and give her a couple of grandchildren. With few exceptions, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, as well as most Native African and Native American religious traditions, strongly opposed celibacy. The general rule was that everybody had to get married, and preferably ASAP. So you can see how things are right now, guys, how it's completely against how things have been for so long. And it's only a matter of time, I think, before it becomes the whole ASAP thing really comes into the picture. This resulted in few unlikely laws that require people to pay additional taxes or sanctions if they fail to say I do by a certain age. Starts off the Romans. So we're going to go back to ancient Rome. The Romans in particular viewed celibacy as an aberration, and in 9 AD, Emperor Augustus introduced the first bachelor tax to encourage marriage. This law, which expanded and developed the previous, I can't speak Latin, let alone pronounce it right, so I'm just going to say a previous thing, suggested the proper age range for people to get married, between the ages of 25 and 60 for men, between the ages of 20 and 50 for women, and laying down heavy sanctions for the naughty reprobates who didn't comply. So we're talking about ancient Rome here. That's a long freaking time ago. And it says for men between the ages of 25 through 60 and women 20 through 50. You know, I would like to know the average age of your Roman citizen back then. Okay, obviously if he was upper class, probably lived longer because obviously better food and access to medicine and things like that. But seriously, bachelors end up being also stripped of some of their rights. They could not inherit property and they could not attend public functions. Now, Augustus's view on women could be summed up in can't live with him, can't live without him. In 17 BC, he gave the following speech. And according to Emperor Augustus, he says, if we could survive without a wife, citizens of Rome, all of us would do without the nuisance. But since nature has so decreed that we cannot manage comfortably with them, nor live in any way without them, we must plan for our lasting preservation rather than our temporary pleasure. Right back then, if we could survive without a wife, we would. Over 2,000 years ago. It's clear he was not a big fan of the delights of marriage, nor particularly interested in popularizing the joyful bond of wedlock. The primary function of the bill was just to bump up birth rates. There you go. And again, what do we have nowadays? And thanks to the feminist movement, which has been going on for decades and has been making men out to be the villains, and pretty much now it's trying to mold men to behave like women and be feminine, and mold women to act like men and be masculine. Everything's out of whack, the polarity's off, and each party is becoming more and more turned off by one another. So you're going to even have less and less marriage. Now, many talk about cultural Marxism, and that's a lot what we got today, and it's doing just that, destroying everything across the board with this regard. And we can go through in a lot of speculation as to how that came about, why it came about, and everything, but that's discussion for another day. Apart from taxing bachelors, it also taxed married people with no children. The Roman population at the time was on a downward slope, and within the upper classes, a declining number of people got married, which is a hell of a problem since there were more children being born illegitimately than legitimately, leaving lands and properties unclaimed. Oh yeah, there was plenty of illegitimate children in ancient Rome. Now, I know it was only a show, but I think about 15 years ago, they had this show called Rome. I think it was on HBO, and I watched both seasons. The first season was in my opinion, pretty good. The second one, not so much, but and again, it was a show, but just the way things were portrayed, good Lord. Divorced women and widows benefited from a short suspension of the time limits. They were allowed respectively 6 months and 1 year to find a new partner. No time to grieve for the dearly departed. You had to get back on the market immediately. Since this caused much dissent, marriage customs turned into a game of musical chairs. They were later extended to 18 months for divorces and 3 years for widows. Oh, how nice. But that was not the last time sanctions were put upon single people. In the 15th century, the Ottoman Empire also established a celibacy tax. The English crown tried to pull the same trick on its subjects in 1695 when Parliament passed the Marriage Duty Act, or registration tax. The unlikely law imposed a tax on births, marriages, and burials, as well as on childless widows and bachelors over the age of 25. The tax was primarily a revenue-raising mechanism for the war in France, but failed to raise an adequate sum of money and was abandoned in 1706. Now, what I also should have mentioned in the beginning, aside from these taxes to encourage people to breed with help with the population, was also, let's be honest here, as a way to raise revenue. I mean, at the end of the day, governments are always going to find different goofy ways to raise revenue. I remember in 2005, I was in London for a month. And on the weekends, I would go on trips. And I was on a bus trip that stopped off at a few different places. And the one place, the tour guide, we were in a village, old village going back to medieval times. And he was talking about how back at that time that they would try to, as a way to raise money, they would tax you if you had windows. So a lot of people would just board up their windows and put like bricks in front of them or something like that so they wouldn't have to pay as much taxes. Being taxed on how many windows you have. You see what I'm talking about? So there's always going to be ways for them to try to raise revenue in one way or another. Two things in life you can count on: death and taxes. Next one. The U.S. state of Missouri was next in 1821, applying a $1 tax on all unmarried men, which at least on paper is still in place today. Now, $1, no big deal now, but $1 in 1821, that's a different ballgame. Montana followed in 1921 with a $3 tax on all bachelors, but that was short-lived. In January 1922, the state Supreme Court struck it down. Notice all these don't work, but people tend to ignore history. Michigan tried hard but failed to pass a similar bill. It was proposed in 1848, 1849, and 1850, and repealed during the Civil War as a revenue measure. It must have been a deeply felt topic because it was brought up again in 1897, 1901, 1911, 1919, and 1935 without ever reaching the floor. What is it with Michigan? All right, Michigan folks, explain away. New Jersey and Wyoming briefly considered anti-bachelor bills in the 1890s, but they also failed. In 1934, California too proposed a $25 bachelor tax, but the tax was never really enacted. Well, you can always count on California to throw more and more taxes at people. In 1919, South Africa imposed a bachelor tax in order to match the white population growth with the black one. In 1923, the town of Repellen in northwest Germany passed a bachelor tax of 2,000 marks per month, which wasn't much as the exchange rate between the dollar and the mark was 1 trillion marks to $1 at the time. This is when Germany was having its hyperinflation in the, I believe, the Weimar Republic. However, this law was quickly overturned by federal authorities. See? They keep doing it over and over and over again. People don't learn from the history. And notice this doesn't work. Okay? Either it doesn't become a law, or it's law for a little while, for whatever reason, just it's overturned or whatever. But people don't learn. But nobody went to as hard and persistently as Benito Mussolini. A celibacy tax was established in Italy in 1927 and targeted bachelors aged 25 to 65 years old, with few exceptions. The goal was, as per usual, to increase the birth rate. Now, how do you think that worked out for Italy under Mussolini? By Mussolini's estimates, the Italian population had to reach 60 million to enable Italy to fight in a major war. Hence his implacable demands for Italian women to have more children in order to reach that number. In a famous speech, he justified the bill saying, now listen to this clip from his speech, "This may surprise you, and some of you may say, do we really need that law? Yes, we need it. Some clever folks say there's too many of us, but the only clever answer is to this, there are too few of us. What are 40 million Italians compared to 90 million Germans and 200 million Slavs?" Newspapers often featured articles praising marriage and traditional families. Propaganda. They even argued that bachelors had a statistically higher rate of delinquency as opposed to other groups, a theory that was also dear to the state of Michigan in the 1910s. Back to Michigan. What the hell's the deal with Michigan in this law? It was suggested that a link existed between delinquent tendencies and also a variety of mental illnesses and celibacy. Again, these were articles in the newspaper that obviously the state sanctioned using newspapers and media to spread propaganda. Imagine that. Glad that never happens today. I hope you're picking up on my sarcasm. The sum to be paid varied according to age. It started from 70 lira for the youngest groups between 25 and 35 years, then rising to 100 lira up to 50 years, and then lowering again to 50 lira, I can't remember what the hell it is, for men older than 50. From the age of 66, men were exonerated. Oh, well, thank you. That's very nice of you. Not that people were living much longer past 66 in that time period. These amounts were increased twice, in April 1934 and in March 1937, with an additional rate that varied according to the subject's income. By 1936, Italian bachelors paid nearly double their normal income tax rate. Imagine that, guys. I want you guys to think right now, you single guys, what you pay typically in income taxes to the federal government. Then imagine that doubling because you're a bachelor. Imagine that. Never say never, guys. The tax on celibacy should have led to an increase in the population, but the results were disastrous. Gee, there's a freaking surprise. Birth rates plunged instead of rising. Nonetheless, the tax was abolished in 1943. Well, now we know the real reason why eventually at the end the Italians rose up and literally tore Mussolini apart. It was the bachelor tax. That was the real reason. At least the money was raised, estimated to have been between 40 and 50 million lira, I can't remember what it is, around $50 million. And it was donated to the Opera Nationale, I can't pronounce this, and it says in parentheses, the Agency for the Protection of Mothers and Children. Okay, there you go. Some people, though, are apparently unable to learn anything from history. After World War II, Poland and the Soviet Union briefly established taxes on childless and unmarried people. In 1986, a celibacy tax was instituted in Romania and continued to be enforced until the Romanian Revolution of 1989. That's it. That's the reason for the revolution, because of that. In 1999, the mayor of, and I can't pronounce this, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this town, A tiny village of less than 700 inhabitants in central Italy proposed to reinstitute a bachelor tax locally to, you guessed it, increase birth rates. And there you go, guys. It's an abrupt ending to this story, to this article, but there's the point. This has been tried over and over and over again. And number one, it doesn't work. What they try to achieve, it doesn't happen. And number two, it ends up being abolished and pissing off a lot of people along the way. But at the end of the day, governments don't give a shit and people don't learn from history. I mean, it's amazing to me. The two subjects that were taught in school, both, and obviously there's some levels of requirement of taking this in high school and college, history and economics. The two areas that people really ought to know about, that most people hate learning about. I always have had a passion for history. I love learning stuff about history. And I think of the saying about it. I can't remember the exact words. I'm sure many of you guys will correct me here because I'm freestyling here. But those that don't know their history are doomed to repeat it. Well, most people don't know their history, so they'll just keep being doomed to repeat it over and over again. And then there's economics, which I love, which most people don't have a fucking clue to understand how. And then, well, I don't need to get into that. But anyhow, guys, let me go into cover. Never say never. It's been tried over and over again in the past. Not going to say it's impossible to happen again. Right now, like over the years, I've been reading these funny things that governments have been trying to do, incentives to give people to breed. But there's never been things like taxes laid upon them in recent times. But I am waiting for it. It's going to happen somewhere. Okay, I can't say it's going to happen in the U.S. of A. But again, mentioned back in Italy during when Mussolini was running the show, of bachelors at one point having their income taxes doubled because of that tax. Again, can you imagine that? Your income tax is doubled? You can't tell me people would be out with torches and pitchforks. Okay, and they certainly wouldn't be breeding over this. So, all right, guys, that'd be a good one to cover there. That is it for today. Be sure to comment down below. Let me know what you think about this. And, guys, if you ever come across a great article that you'd like to share, email it to me, strongsuccessfulmail@gmail.com. And if it's definitely a good one, I'll cover it later on down the road. I get tons of emails, so just bear with me as I get to it. And that also includes really good personal stories that you want to share about crazy things you've gone through with women, things you've overcome, whatever. Email it me, and I'll cover it down the road. And also, guys, if you are on Instagram or Locals, check me out, Strong Successful Male. I'm really making a push into social media this year and definitely expanding the business in that direction. And you'll see more of what I'm planning on doing this year later on, but check me out. And be sure to like the video, share with your friends, and subscribe. And I'll catch you next time.